The millionaire spoke Mandarin to exclude her, and the janitor responded fluently in front of everyone. Get ready to witness one of the most incredible stories of hidden intelligence, cultural pride, inspired by this amazing story of respect, dignity, and the power of unexpected knowledge. Make sure to hit that like button right now, subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories, and don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single moment of what's about to unfold. Now let's dive into this extraordinary story that will remind you why assumptions can be dangerous and respect should be universal. Chapter 1. The Dismissal. The marble floors of Chen Holdings' 42nd floor gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights as Lin Wei pushed her cleaning cart through the executive corridors of one of San Francisco's most prestigious investment firms. At 63 years old, Lin had been working as a night janitor for Chen Holdings for nearly 8 years, arriving each evening at 6 p.m. to clean the offices of people who made more money in a day than she earned in a month. Despite her age and the physical demands of her job, Lin maintained a dignity that impressed even the security guards who saw her come and go each night. She wore her standard-issue blue uniform with pride, kept her graying hair neatly pulled back in a bun, and approached her work with the same meticulous attention to detail that had characterized everything she had done throughout her life. But what none of her colleagues knew, what none of the executives whose offices she cleaned had ever bothered to discover, was that Lin Wei possessed one of the most brilliant minds in the building. Born in Beijing in 1960, Lin had been a professor of international economics at Tsinghua University before immigrating to the United States in 1995 with her husband and teenage daughter. She held a PhD in economics from Beijing University and had published dozens of academic papers on global financial markets that were still cited by researchers around the world. But her Chinese credentials had not transferred easily to the American job market. Despite her fluency in English, her accent made some employers uncomfortable. Despite her advanced education, American companies seemed to prefer candidates with domestic degrees. And despite her expertise in international finance, she had been unable to find work in her field after arriving in San Francisco. So Lin Wei, former professor and respected economist, had taken a job cleaning offices to support her family while her husband drove a taxi and their daughter excelled in school. It was supposed to be temporary, just until they could establish themselves in their new country. But temporary had stretched into years, and years had stretched into decades. Tonight, Lin was cleaning the conference room where Chen Holdings' senior partners held their weekly strategy meetings. The room was impressive, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the San Francisco Bay, a polished oak table that could seat 20 people, and state-of-the-art presentation equipment that suggested the kind of high-level business discussions that took place there. As Lin carefully dusted the table and arranged the chairs, she couldn't help but notice the documents and charts that had been left scattered across the surface. Her trained eye immediately recognized financial projections for what appeared to be a major acquisition in the Chinese market, exactly the kind of complex international transaction that she had spent decades studying and teaching. From the papers, she could see Chen Holdings was considering acquiring a manufacturing company in Shenzhen, but the financial analysis seemed flawed. The projections failed to account for recent changes in Chinese regulatory policy that would significantly impact the deal's profitability. Lin had read about these policy changes in the Chinese financial press, which she still followed religiously despite working as a janitor. But pointing out these oversights was not her place. She was there to clean, not to provide. Strategic advice to executives who had never acknowledged her existence beyond nodding when she emptied their trash cans. As Lin continued cleaning, she heard voices approaching the conference room. It was unusual for executives to be in the office this late, but Chen Holdings had been working on several major deals that required coordination with Asian markets in different time zones. The door opened, and 3 men entered. David Chen, the CEO and founder of Chen Holdings, Michael Zhang, the chief financial officer, and Robert Liu, the director of international investments. All 3 were Chinese-American executives in their 40s and 50s who had built successful careers in Silicon Valley's financial sector. Lin immediately moved toward the corner of the room, making herself as inconspicuous as possible while continuing to dust the furniture. In her 8 years of working at Chen Holdings, she had perfected the art of being invisible, present enough to do her job, but unobtrusive enough that important people could ignore her completely. "We need to finalize the Shenzhen acquisition strategy tonight," David Chen was saying as he settled into his chair at the head of the conference table. "The Beijing office is expecting our proposal first thing Monday morning." "I've reviewed the financial projections again," Michael Zhang replied, spreading out the same documents that Lin had been observing earlier. "The numbers look solid, but I'm concerned about some of the regulatory complexities." "That's exactly what we need to discuss," Robert Liu added, pulling out his laptop. "There are some recent policy changes that could affect our timeline." As the three executives began their discussion, Lin continued her cleaning duties while listening to their analysis of the acquisition. Despite her determination to remain invisible, she found herself increasingly frustrated by the fundamental errors in their strategic approach. They were treating the Shenzhen market as if it operated under the same conditions that had existed 5 years earlier, ignoring recent policy shifts that had dramatically altered the business environment. They were projecting revenue growth based on outdated data and failing to account for new compliance requirements that would significantly increase operational costs. Most importantly, they were underestimating the cultural and political sensitivities involved in foreign acquisitions of Chinese manufacturing companies. Their approach was technically competent, but culturally tone-deaf, exactly the kind of mistake that could turn a profitable opportunity into an expensive disaster. But Lin remained silent, focusing on her cleaning, while the three executives made what she recognized as potentially catastrophic strategic decisions based on incomplete information and cultural misunderstandings. As the meeting progressed, David Chen's frustration became increasingly evident. "I'm not comfortable moving forward without better intelligence about the regulatory environment," he said finally. "We're talking about a $200 million acquisition, and I feel like we're operating blind. Maybe we should delay until we can send someone to Beijing for more direct research," Michael Zhang suggested. "We don't have time for delays," Robert Liu replied. "Our competitors are already moving into this market. If we wait another month, we'll lose the opportunity entirely." The tension in the room was palpable as the three executives struggled with incomplete information and the pressure to make a decision that could determine their company's future in the Chinese market. And in the corner of the room, quietly dusting furniture and emptying waste baskets, stood someone who possessed exactly the knowledge and expertise they desperately needed. Someone they had never bothered to notice, despite seeing her every day for 8 years. Chapter 2. The Assumption. The following week, Lin Wei arrived at Chen Holdings for her evening shift to find the executive floor buzzing with unusual activity. Even at 6 p.m., when most employees had gone home, the offices were still occupied by analysts, associates, and senior executives working frantically on what appeared to be an urgent project. Lin learned from the security guard that Chen Holdings was facing a crisis with their Shenzhen acquisition. The Chinese manufacturing company they intended to purchase had suddenly increased their asking price by 30%, claiming that new regulatory requirements would necessitate significant infrastructure investments that hadn't been factored into the original negotiations. "Mr. Chen is not happy," the security guard confided to Lin as she signed in for her shift. "Word is, they might have to abandon the whole deal, which would cost millions in preparation costs and damage their reputation with other Chinese companies." As Lin made her rounds through the executive offices, she could see the stress and frustration on every face. Analysts were working with stacks of documents, trying to understand regulations they couldn't read in their original Chinese. Associates were making phone calls to consultants and experts, seeking advice that would cost the company hundreds of thousands of dollars. And in the center of it all was David Chen, whose office lights stayed on until nearly midnight each night, as he struggled to salvage a deal that represented his company's ambitious expansion into the Chinese market. Lin had worked in these offices long enough to understand the corporate hierarchy and the pressure that accompanied major business decisions. She also understood, better than anyone in the building, exactly what had gone wrong with the Shenzhen acquisition and what Chen Holdings needed to do to fix it. But she remained silent, cleaning offices and emptying trash cans, while watching brilliant people make costly mistakes due to cultural misunderstandings and incomplete information. The crisis came to Ahead the following Tuesday, when Lin arrived at work to find David Chen, Michael Zhang and Robert Liu in the conference room with two additional men she didn't recognize. From their expensive suits and the deference shown to them by the Chen Holdings executives, Lin guessed they were either major investors or potential partners whose support was crucial to the company's future. As Lin began her cleaning routine in the adjacent offices, she could hear the conversation through the conference room's glass walls. The two visitors were expressing serious concerns about Chen Holdings' ability to successfully navigate the Chinese market, questioning whether the company had the cultural expertise necessary to complete major acquisitions in Asia. The Shenzhen situation suggests that your team may not fully understand the complexities of doing business in modern China, one of the visitors was saying. We're hesitant to commit additional capital to international expansion if you're going to encounter these kinds of surprises. David Chen's response was defensive but tinged with desperation. We have extensive experience with international markets. The Shenzhen situation involved some unexpected regulatory changes that no one could have predicted. But Lin knew that wasn't true. The regulatory changes had been announced months earlier in Chinese financial publications and discussed extensively in Beijing business circles. The problem wasn't that the changes were unpredictable. The problem was that Chen Holdings had been relying on English-language sources and Western consultants who didn't have direct access to Chinese government communications. As the meeting continued, the two visitors became increasingly skeptical of Chen Holdings' claims about their Chinese market expertise. They began discussing alternative investment opportunities with companies that had stronger track records in Asian markets. Lin could see David Chen's growing panic as he realized that his company's reputation and future growth prospects were being damaged by their failure to properly navigate a single acquisition. 8 years of building Chen Holdings into a respected investment firm could be undone by this one strategic mistake. And still, Lin remained silent, dusting furniture and arranging chairs while possessing exactly the knowledge that could save the company where she had worked faithfully for nearly a decade. But that silence was about to be broken in a way that would shock everyone in the building and fundamentally change how they viewed both their assumptions and their employees. The moment of truth was approaching, and Lin Wei was about to demonstrate that intelligence and expertise can be found in the most unexpected places, if people are humble enough to recognize it when they see it. As she finished cleaning the conference room and prepared to move to the next office, Lin overheard David Chen making one final attempt to salvage the meeting with his potential investors. "Gentlemen, I understand your concerns about our Chinese market capabilities," David said, his voice carrying the strain of a man who was watching years of work slip away. "But I assure you that we have the expertise necessary to succeed in Asia. We just need time to resolve some temporary complications with our current acquisition." One of the visitors responded in a tone that suggested the meeting was effectively over. "Mr. Chen, we appreciate your confidence, but actions speak louder than words. Until you can demonstrate actual competence in the Chinese market, rather than just claiming it, we'll have to explore other investment opportunities." And that's when David Chen made the decision that would change everything. A decision born of frustration, embarrassment, and the arrogance that comes from assuming you understand more than you actually do. Chapter 3. The Humiliation. As the two potential investors gathered their materials and prepared to leave the conference room, David Chen felt the weight of impending failure crushing down on him. 8 years of building Chen Holdings, countless hours of strategic planning, and millions of dollars in preparation costs were about to be lost because of his company's inability to navigate a single acquisition in the Chinese market. In his frustration and desperation, David made a choice that revealed both his cultural insensitivity and his complete lack of awareness about the people who worked in his building every day. "You know what the problem is?" David said to Michael Zhang and Robert Liu in Mandarin, apparently assuming that speaking Chinese would make their conversation private, despite being in a room with glass walls where other employees might overhear. "We're surrounded by people who don't understand our culture or our business. How can we succeed in China when we're working with Americans who think they know Asia because they've read some consulting reports?" Lin Wei froze in the hallway outside the conference room. Her cleaning cart stopped mid-push as she heard David Chen's words clearly through the glass walls. She understood every syllable, every nuance, every cultural implication of what he was saying. Michael Zhang responded in Mandarin, apparently emboldened by the assumed privacy of their conversation. The consultants we've been hiring are useless. They charge enormous fees to tell us things we already know, and they miss the important details because they don't really understand how business works in China. Exactly, Robert Liu added, also in Mandarin. We need people who actually understand Chinese culture and business practices, not these expensive Western consultants who think they can learn everything from textbooks. But David Chen wasn't finished. His frustration was overflowing, and he began speaking more loudly, apparently forgetting that sound carries through glass walls and that other people might be present in the area. The cleaning lady probably understands more about China than most of the people we've been paying for advice, David said in Mandarin, gesturing dismissively toward the hallway where Lin was standing. At least she's actually Chinese, even if she's just a janitor who probably doesn't speak English well enough to understand business conversations. The three men laughed at David's comment, apparently finding humor in the idea that a cleaning lady might possess knowledge that their expensive consultants lacked. But what they didn't know, what they had never bothered to discover despite working in the same building for 8 years, was that the cleaning lady they were dismissing so casually was Dr. Lin Wei, former professor of international economics at one of China's most prestigious universities, fluent speaker of 5 languages, and one of the most knowledgeable experts on Chinese business practices anywhere in San Francisco. Lin stood in the hallway, feeling the familiar sting of condescension and cultural dismissiveness that had characterized much of her experience since immigrating to the United States. She had encountered this attitude countless times over the past 28 years, the assumption that her job title defined her intelligence, that her accent indicated limited capability, that her appearance suggested irrelevance to important conversations. But tonight was different. Tonight, these assumptions were costing David Chen's company millions of dollars and potentially destroying the futures of hundreds of employees who depended on Chen Holdings for their livelihoods. And tonight, Lin Wei had finally had enough of being invisible. She pushed her cleaning cart to the side of the hallway and walked directly toward the conference room door. Her heart was pounding, not from fear but from the anticipation of finally being able to use her knowledge to help, rather than standing silently while watching preventable disasters unfold. Lin knocked firmly on the conference room door and waited for permission to enter. David Chen looked up with annoyance, clearly irritated by the interruption during what he thought was a private conversation. "Yes?" David asked in English, his tone suggesting that whatever the cleaning lady wanted should be handled quickly so that important people could return to their important discussion. "Mr. Chen," Lin said in clear, unaccented English that immediately surprised all 3 executives, "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation about the challenges you're facing with your Shenzhen acquisition." David Chen's expression shifted from annoyance to confusion. The cleaning lady was speaking English more fluently than he had expected, and she seemed to understand that they had been discussing business matters that should have been beyond her comprehension. "I appreciate your concern," David replied cautiously, "but we're handling the situation." "I don't think you are," Lin said calmly, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who knew exactly what she was talking about. "And if you continue with your current approach, you're going to lose not only the Shenzhen acquisition, but also the confidence of any future Chinese partners who hear about how badly you've managed this negotiation." The 3 executives stared at Lin in amazement. The cleaning lady wasn't just speaking fluent English, she was discussing complex business strategy with the confidence of someone who actually understood international acquisitions. "I'm sorry," Michael Zhang interjected, "but who are you to comment on our business strategy?" And that's when Lin Wei smiled. The same quiet, knowing smile she had worn when students asked challenging questions during her lectures at Tsinghua University. "My name is Dr. Lin Wei," she said, stepping fully into the conference room with the presence of someone reclaiming her rightful place in an academic discussion. "I hold a PhD in international economics from Beijing University, and I was a professor at Tsinghua University for 15 years before immigrating to the United States." The silence that followed was so complete that Lin could hear the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic on the street 42 floors below. "For the past 8 years," Lin continued, I have been cleaning your offices while listening to your business discussions and watching you make preventable mistakes based on cultural misunderstandings and outdated information about Chinese markets. She paused to let this information sink in, then delivered the statement that would change everything. And 3 minutes ago, Mr. Chen, you said in Mandarin that even the cleaning lady probably understands more about China than your expensive consultants. Lin's smile widened slightly. You were absolutely right about that. Chapter 4. The Revelation. The silence in the conference room stretched for what felt like an eternity as David Chen, Michael Zhang, and Robert Liu processed what they had just heard. The cleaning lady, the woman they had seen pushing a cart through their hallways for 8 years without ever truly acknowledging her existence, had just revealed herself to be Dr. Lin Wei, a former economics professor who understood their business better than they did. David Chen's face cycled through emotions, shock, embarrassment, and growing realization of the magnitude of his cultural insensitivity. He had just dismissed someone as irrelevant based on her job title, while simultaneously demonstrating exactly the kind of cultural blindness that had caused his company's problems in the Chinese market. Dr. Wei, David finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper, we had no idea about your background. Of course you didn't, Lin replied with calm dignity. In 8 years of working in this building, none of you ever asked about my education, my experience, or my knowledge. You saw a cleaning uniform and made assumptions about everything else. Michael Zhang, who prided himself on being more culturally sensitive than his colleagues, attempted to salvage the situation. Dr. Wei, we apologize for any misunderstanding. We certainly meant no disrespect. Mr. Zhang, Lin said, switching effortlessly to Mandarin, 你刚才说经济公不懂生意，你现在想要道歉吗? You just said that cleaning staff don't understand business. Do you want to apologize now? Michael's face flushed red as he realized that Lin had understood every word of their conversation, including his own dismissive comments about Americans not understanding Chinese culture. But Lin wasn't finished. She had spent 8 years watching these executives make costly mistakes that could have been easily avoided with proper cultural knowledge and current information about Chinese business practices. Mr. Chen, your Shenzhen acquisition is failing because you're approaching it like it's 2015 instead of 2023, Lin continued, switching back to English. The regulatory environment has changed dramatically since the new economic policies were announced last year. Your financial projections are based on compliance costs that are no longer accurate. She moved to the whiteboard at the front of the conference room and began writing in both English and Chinese, outlining the specific regulatory changes that had affected manufacturing acquisitions in Guangdong province. The company you're trying to acquire raised their price by 30% because they know you. Don't understand the new environmental compliance requirements, Lin explained as she wrote. They're taking advantage of your ignorance to renegotiate terms that were already favorable to them. David Chen watched in fascination as Lin filled the whiteboard with detailed analysis that addressed every concern they had been struggling with for weeks. Her knowledge was comprehensive, current, and precisely relevant to their situation. Furthermore, Lin continued, your negotiation strategy has been culturally inappropriate from the beginning. You've been treating this like a Silicon Valley tech acquisition instead of a Chinese manufacturing partnership. Your approach signals to them that you view Chinese companies as subordinate rather than equal partners. Robert Liu, who had been silent throughout Lin's presentation, finally found his voice. Dr. Wei, how do you know so much about current Chinese business practices if you've been working as a janitor for 8 years? Lin turned from the whiteboard to face him directly. Mr. Liu, did you assume that taking a cleaning job meant I stopped thinking? I read Chinese financial publications every day. I maintain contacts with former colleagues in Beijing. I follow policy developments and market trends because economics was my life's work before it became my hobby. She gestured toward the documents scattered across the conference table. I've been watching you struggle with this acquisition for months, seeing you make mistakes that could be easily corrected with proper guidance. But you never asked for my input because you never saw me as anything more than part of the building's maintenance. The weight of their oversight was becoming clear to all 3 executives. They had been paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to consultants for advice that was less accurate and less current than the knowledge possessed by someone they passed in the hallways every day without acknowledgement. "Dr. Wei," David said carefully, "what would you recommend we do to salvage this acquisition?" Lin smiled, not the polite, deferential smile she had worn as a cleaning lady, but the confident, knowing smile of a professor who had just been asked her area of expertise. "First, you need to completely change your approach to the negotiations," she said, returning to the whiteboard. "Chinese business relationships are built on long-term partnership and mutual respect, not short-term profit maximization. Your current strategy suggests that you view this acquisition as extracting value from a Chinese company rather than building collaborative value together." She began outlining a comprehensive strategy that addressed not only the financial and regulatory aspects of the acquisition, but also the cultural and political sensitivities that American companies often overlooked when doing business in China. Second, you need to demonstrate genuine understanding of and respect for Chinese business culture. This means acknowledging that your Chinese partners have valuable expertise and insights, not just manufacturing capabilities that you can optimize with Western management techniques. As Lin continued her analysis, the three executives found themselves taking notes like students in a graduate-level economics course. Her insights were profound, her knowledge was current, and her strategic recommendations were exactly what they needed to transform a failing acquisition into a successful partnership. Third, and most importantly, Lin concluded, you need to recognize that successful international business requires cultural intelligence, not just financial intelligence. You can have the best analysts and the most sophisticated financial models, but if you don't understand the cultural context in which you're operating, you will continue to make expensive mistakes. When Lin finished her presentation, the conference room was quiet, except for the sound of three executives processing the most valuable business advice they had received in years, advice that had come from someone they had dismissed as irrelevant, based on her job title and assumptions about her capabilities. David Chen was the first to speak, and his voice carried a humility that had been absent from his earlier conversations. "Dr. Wei, I owe you an apology that goes far beyond our comments tonight. We've been incredibly blind and disrespectful, and our ignorance has cost this company dearly in more ways than one." But Lin's response would surprise them even more than her expertise had. Chapter 5. The Opportunity. Dr. Lin Wei looked at the three executives who had just witnessed the complete demolition of their assumptions about intelligence, expertise, and cultural understanding. She could see the shame in their faces, but also something else, genuine recognition of their mistakes and authentic desire to do better. "Mr. Chen," Lin said thoughtfully, "apologies are meaningful only when they lead to changed behavior. The question now is whether you're truly willing to address the cultural blindness that has characterized your approach to international business." David Chen nodded earnestly. "Dr. Wei, we clearly need your expertise. Would you be willing to consult with us on the Shenzhen acquisition? We'll pay whatever consulting rate is appropriate for someone with your qualifications." Lin almost smiled at the irony. 8 years earlier, she had applied for consulting positions with firms like Chen Holdings and been rejected, despite her impressive credentials. Now the same company was desperately seeking her expertise because they finally understood what they had been overlooking. "Mr. Chen, before we discuss consulting arrangements, I want you to understand something important," Lin replied. "My knowledge of current Chinese business practices is extensive precisely because I've maintained my intellectual engagement with my field despite working as a janitor. Taking this job wasn't an intellectual surrender. It was a practical necessity that allowed me to support my family while staying current with developments in international economics." She gestured toward the whiteboard, where her analysis was still visible. "Every evening for 8 years, I've cleaned your offices while observing your business discussions. I've seen you struggle with cultural misunderstandings that I could have helped you avoid. I've watched you pay consultants enormous fees for advice that was less accurate than what I could have provided for free if you had simply asked." Michael Zhang, who had been taking notes throughout Lin's presentation, looked up with obvious embarrassment. "Dr. Wei, why didn't you ever offer your insights before tonight?" "Mr. Zhang, would you have listened?" Lin asked directly. "If a cleaning lady had approached you 3 months ago and offered to help with your Chinese acquisition strategy, would you have taken her seriously? Or would you have assumed she was overstepping her boundaries? The question hung in the air unanswered, because all three executives knew the truth. They would have dismissed her offer without consideration, just as they had dismissed her presence for 8 years. But tonight is different, Lin continued. Tonight you've learned that your assumptions about people are not only wrong, but expensive. So now I'm willing to help you, but only if you're willing to make fundamental changes to how you approach international business and how you value the knowledge of everyone in your organization. David Chen leaned forward, recognizing that this conversation represented a turning point not just for the Shenzhen acquisition, but for his entire company's future. Dr. Wei, what changes are you referring to? First, you need to hire me as your Director of Chinese Market Strategy, Lin said, with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was worth. Not as a consultant who provides temporary advice, but as a permanent executive who can ensure that your company doesn't repeat these cultural mistakes. The request was bold, but entirely reasonable given what they had just witnessed. Lin's expertise was clearly superior to anything they could purchase from external consultants, and her cultural insights were exactly what Chen Holdings needed to succeed in Asian markets. Second, you need to establish cultural competency as a core requirement for all senior executives involved in international business. This means mandatory education about the markets you're entering, not just the financial aspects, but the cultural and political contexts that determine success or failure. Robert Liu nodded slowly, recognizing the wisdom of Lin's recommendation. Dr. Wei, what you're describing would represent a significant cultural shift for our company. Mr. Liu, that's exactly what's needed, Lin replied. Your company's approach to international business has been culturally arrogant and strategically naive. You've assumed that American business practices can be applied universally without modification, and you've undervalued the importance of genuine cultural understanding. She moved back to the whiteboard and began outlining a comprehensive strategy for transforming Chen Holdings from a domestically focused firm into a truly international organization. Third, you need to recognize that expertise exists throughout your organization, not just in the executive suite. The people who work in your building every day, the security guards, the administrative staff, the maintenance workers, come from diverse backgrounds and possess knowledge that could benefit your business if you were humble enough to acknowledge it. As Lin spoke, the three executives began to understand that she was offering them something much more valuable than just help with a single acquisition. She was offering to transform their entire approach to international business and organizational culture. Dr. Wei, David said carefully, what would you want in terms of compensation and position within the company? Lin had been thinking about this question for years, imagining what it would be like to return to meaningful work that utilized her education and expertise. But she had also learned valuable lessons about humility and perspective during her years as a janitor. I want a salary commensurate with my education and experience, comparable to what you would pay any other senior executive with a PhD and 15 years of relevant experience, she said. But more importantly, I want decision-making authority over all Chinese market strategies and cultural competency initiatives. The terms were fair, but represented a significant commitment from Chen Holdings. They would be hiring someone who had been working as a janitor and placing her in a senior executive position based on a single evening's demonstration of her capabilities. There's one more condition, Lin added. I want you to establish a formal program for recognizing and developing talent throughout your organization, regardless of current job titles or backgrounds. Too many companies waste human potential because they make assumptions about people's capabilities based on their circumstances. David Chen looked at his colleagues, seeing recognition in their faces that Dr. Lin Wei represented exactly what their company needed to succeed in international markets. Her expertise was proven, her insights were valuable, and her understanding of cultural nuances was precisely what they had been lacking. Dr. Wei, I accept all of your conditions, David said finally. When can you start? Lin smiled, the satisfied smile of someone who had waited 8 years for the opportunity to prove her worth and finally been given the chance to use her talents meaningfully. Mr. Chen, I can start immediately. But first, let me show you exactly how to salvage your Shenzhen acquisition and turn it into the kind of successful partnership that will establish Chen Holdings as a respected player in the Chinese market. What happened next would transform not only the failed acquisition, but the entire trajectory of Chen Holdings as an international investment firm. Chapter 6. The Transformation. 3 months after Dr. Lin Wei's dramatic revelation in the conference room, Chen Holdings had undergone a transformation that surprised everyone in the company. The failed Shenzhen acquisition had not only been salvaged, but had become a model partnership that other American companies were studying as an example of successful cross-cultural business collaboration. Lin's first day as Director of Chinese Market Strategy had begun at 8 a.m. sharp, when she walked through the same hallways where she had pushed a cleaning cart for 8 years, now wearing a tailored business suit and carrying the kind of leather briefcase that executives used for important documents. The symbolic transformation was powerful, but the practical changes were even more significant. Her initial task had been to completely restructure Chen Holdings' approach to the Shenzhen negotiation. Instead of the adversarial tactics that had characterized their previous strategy, Lin implemented a collaborative framework that treated the Chinese company as a valued partner rather than an acquisition target. In Chinese business culture, Lin had explained to the expanded strategy team during her first executive presentation, trust and relationship building are prerequisites for any meaningful negotiation. You cannot extract value from partners who don't trust your intentions or respect your cultural sensitivity. Working directly with the Shenzhen company's leadership, Lin had arranged for David Chen and his team to visit the manufacturing facility and spend time understanding not just the financial aspects of the business, but the cultural and operational context in which it operated. The visit had been a revelation for the Chen Holdings executives. Instead of seeing a manufacturing operation that needed American optimization, they discovered a sophisticated company with innovative approaches to production efficiency and quality control that could actually teach Chen Holdings about best practices in their own industry. We learned more about manufacturing excellence in 3 days in Shenzhen than we had understood from months of financial analysis, Michael Zhang would later tell his colleagues. Dr. Wei was right. We had been approaching this as cultural superiors instead of potential partners. But the Shenzhen acquisition was only the beginning of Lin's impact on Chen Holdings. Her broader mandate was to transform the company's entire approach to international business, and she tackled this challenge with the same systematic methodology that had characterized her academic career. First, Lin established a cultural competency institute within Chen Holdings that required all senior executives to complete comprehensive education about the markets where they intended to do business. This wasn't superficial cultural awareness training, but deep immersion in the economic, political, and social contexts that determined business success in different regions. Understanding markets means understanding people, Lin explained during the program's launch presentation. Financial models and strategic frameworks are useful tools, but they're meaningless without genuine comprehension of the cultural environments where they'll be applied. Second, Lin created a global advisory network that included experts from every region where Chen Holdings was considering expansion. Instead of relying exclusively on expensive Western consultants, the company now had direct access to local business leaders, former government officials, and academic experts who provided real-time insights about market conditions and cultural sensitivities. Most importantly, Lin established what she called the Hidden Talent Initiative, a systematic program for identifying and developing expertise that existed throughout the organization but had been overlooked due to assumptions about job titles and backgrounds. The results were remarkable. Within 6 months, Chen Holdings had discovered that their head of building security was a former military intelligence officer with extensive knowledge of Southeast Asian political developments. Their administrative assistant in the accounting department held an MBA from a prestigious European university and spoke 4 languages fluently. A maintenance technician had previously worked as an engineer for a major automotive company and possessed valuable insights about manufacturing processes. We were sitting on a goldmine of talent and expertise, David Chen would later reflect, but we were blind to it because we only valued knowledge that came with the right job titles and credentials. Lin's transformation of Chen Holdings extended beyond internal culture to external business relationships. Under her guidance, the company began approaching international partnerships with genuine humility and respect for local expertise, rather than the cultural arrogance that had characterized their previous strategy. The Shenzhen partnership had become so successful that 3 other Chinese companies approached Chen Holdings about potential collaborations. Word had spread through business circles that Chen Holdings was one of the few American firms that actually understood how to work respectfully and effectively with Chinese partners. But perhaps the most significant change was in how the company valued and treated all of its employees. Lin's journey from janitor to senior executive had become a powerful symbol within the organization that talent and intelligence could be found anywhere, and that everyone deserved to be seen and respected, regardless of their current circumstances. Dr. Wei changed more than our business strategy, Sarah Martinez, a junior analyst, would later say. She changed how we see each other and how we value different types of knowledge and experience. The financial results of Lin's initiatives were impressive. Chen Holdings' international revenue had increased by 240% in her first year, driven primarily by successful partnerships in Asian markets. The company's reputation for cultural sensitivity and collaborative business practices had attracted new clients and partners who specifically wanted to work with an American firm that understood international nuances. But for Lin personally, the most meaningful change was simpler. She was finally able to use her education and expertise to make a meaningful contribution to work that mattered. After 8 years of intellectual underemployment, she was once again solving complex problems and teaching others about the subjects that had been her life's passion. Standing in her new office on the 42nd floor, an office with the same view of San Francisco Bay that she had cleaned for 8 years, Lin reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought her from invisibility to influence. The assumptions that had kept her hidden for so long had finally been shattered, but the lessons she had learned during those years of observation and patience had made her a more effective leader than she might have been otherwise. She understood firsthand how quickly assumptions could blind people to reality, how cultural arrogance could cost millions of dollars, and how much talent was wasted when organizations only valued certain types of knowledge and experience. Most importantly, Lin had learned that dignity and intelligence were not dependent on job titles or social recognition, and that the most profound transformations often came from the most unexpected sources. The cleaning lady, who had been dismissed as irrelevant, had become the executive who saved the company, not through revenge, but through the patient application of expertise that had always been there, waiting to be recognized. Chapter 7. The Recognition. 1 year after Dr. Lin Wei's transformation from janitor to executive, Chen Holdings was invited to present their cross-cultural business methodology at the International Business Forum in Singapore, one of the most prestigious conferences in the global finance industry. The invitation specifically requested that Dr. Wei serve as the primary speaker, recognizing her unique expertise in bridging American and Chinese business cultures. As Lin stood backstage at the Marina Bay Convention Center, preparing to address an audience of 800 business leaders from across Asia and North America, she reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this moment. Just 18 months earlier, she had been cleaning conference rooms while watching executives make cultural mistakes that cost millions of dollars. Now she was being recognized as one of the leading experts on international business collaboration. The presentation she was about to deliver was titled Hidden Assets: How Cultural Assumptions Blind Organizations to Their Own Potential, and it would use Chen Holdings' transformation as a case study for how companies could unlock value by recognizing expertise regardless of where it appeared in their organizational structure. Ladies and gentlemen, the conference moderator announced, please welcome Dr. Lin Wei, Director of Chinese Market Strategy at Chen Holdings, speaking on the intersection of cultural intelligence and business success. As Lin walked onto the stage, she could see David Chen, Michael Zhang, and Robert Liu sitting in the front row, watching with obvious pride as their former janitor commanded the attention of some of the most influential business leaders in the world. 18 months ago, Lin began, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium's sound system, I was working as a night janitor in a San Francisco investment firm, cleaning the offices of executives who were struggling with failed international acquisitions. These executives had impressive credentials, substantial resources, and access to the best consultants money could buy. But they lacked the one thing that could have saved them millions of dollars: genuine cultural understanding. The audience was immediately engaged, recognizing the setup for a story that would challenge their assumptions about expertise and value creation. What those executives didn't know, Lin continued, was that the woman cleaning their offices held a PhD in international economics and had spent 15 years teaching at one of China's most prestigious universities. They never discovered this because they never asked. They saw a cleaning uniform and made assumptions about everything else. Lin's presentation continued for 45 minutes, during which she outlined not only the specific mistakes that Chen Holdings had made in their international business strategy, but the broader pattern of cultural blindness that prevented many organizations from recognizing and utilizing the expertise that already existed within their structures. The most expensive consulting advice, Lin explained, is often less valuable than the knowledge possessed by employees who understand different cultural contexts from personal experience. But organizations waste this expertise because they only value certain types of credentials and backgrounds. She used Chen Holdings' transformation as a detailed case study, showing how a single evening's conversation had led to a complete restructuring of the company's approach to international business. The Shenzhen acquisition that had been failing was now generating 35% annual returns. The company had successfully expanded into 3 additional Asian markets. Most importantly, Chen Holdings had become known throughout the region as an American firm that genuinely understood how to work collaboratively with Asian partners. Cultural intelligence, Lin emphasized, is not something you can acquire through textbooks or consulting reports. It requires genuine respect for different perspectives, willingness to acknowledge your own limitations, and humility to learn from people who may not have traditional credentials, but possess deep practical knowledge. The question and answer session that followed was extensive and substantive, with audience members wanting to understand how they could apply similar principles in their own organizations. Dr. Wei asked Margaret Chen, the CEO of a major logistics company, how can organizations systematically identify hidden expertise among their employees? The first step is changing your assumptions about where expertise can be found, Lin replied. Every employee brings unique knowledge based on their background, experience, and cultural perspective. The question is whether leadership is humble enough to seek out and value that knowledge. Another audience member asked about the practical challenges of implementing cultural competency initiatives in established organizations. Change is difficult, Lin acknowledged, especially when it requires admitting that previous approaches were culturally insensitive or strategically flawed. But the cost of cultural blindness is much higher than the cost of cultural education. Chen Holdings learned this lesson expensively, but they were willing to change their entire approach once they understood the stakes. The most meaningful question came from Dr. James Liu, a professor of international business at the National University of Singapore. Dr. Wei, your story is remarkable, but it also highlights systemic problems with how organizations value different types of knowledge and experience. What advice would you give to other immigrants who possess expertise that isn't being recognized in their current positions? Lin paused before answering, thinking about the thousands of immigrants around the world who were working in jobs that didn't utilize their education and experience, not by choice, but by necessity. My advice is to never stop learning and never stop believing in the value of your knowledge, she said finally. Circumstances may force you to take positions that don't reflect your capabilities, but those circumstances are temporary if you maintain your intellectual engagement and remain ready for opportunities to demonstrate your expertise. More importantly, Lin continued, don't let other people's assumptions define your sense of worth. I spent 8 years cleaning offices, but I never stopped being an economist. The knowledge was always there, waiting for the right moment to be recognized and applied. The standing ovation that followed Lin's presentation was both prolonged and enthusiastic, reflecting not just appreciation for her insights, but recognition of the broader principles she represented. After the conference concluded, Lin was approached by dozens of business leaders who wanted to discuss consulting opportunities, potential partnerships, and ways to implement similar cultural competency initiatives in their own organizations. But perhaps the most meaningful conversation came when David Chen approached her as the crowd was dispersing. "Lin, watching you present today made me realize how much our company has gained by finally recognizing your expertise," he said. "But it also made me think about how much talent we're probably still overlooking in other organizations because of our own cultural blind spots." "David, that awareness is the beginning of wisdom," Lin replied. "The goal isn't to feel guilty about past mistakes, but to ensure that we don't repeat them. Every organization has hidden assets, people whose knowledge and experience could benefit the company if leadership were open to recognizing it." As Lin left the convention center that evening, she reflected on how completely her professional life had been transformed since that night in the conference room, when she had finally spoken up about her expertise. She had gone from being invisible to being influential, from being dismissed to being sought after, from cleaning conference rooms to commanding them. But perhaps most importantly, she had proven that expertise and intelligence are not dependent on job titles or social recognition, and that the most valuable insights often come from the most unexpected sources. The woman who had been assumed to be irrelevant had become the expert that everyone wanted to learn from, not by changing who she was, but by finally being allowed to show who she had always been. Chapter 8. The Legacy. 2 years after her transformation from janitor to executive, Dr. Lin Wei sat in her office at Chen Holdings, reviewing applications for the company's newly established Cultural Intelligence Fellowship Program. The program, which had become a model for other organizations seeking to develop genuine, international business expertise, brought together professionals from diverse backgrounds to study cross-cultural business strategies and develop innovative approaches to global collaboration. What made Lin most proud wasn't just the program's success, but the fact that half of the fellowship recipients were employees who had been identified through the Hidden Talent Initiative, people whose expertise had been overlooked because of assumptions about their backgrounds or current job titles. This year's fellows included Maria Santos, a former administrative assistant who held a master's degree in Latin American studies and was now leading Chen Holdings' expansion into South American markets. Ahmed Hassan, a security guard who had been a financial analyst in Syria before immigrating to the United States and was now helping the company understand Middle Eastern investment opportunities. And Jennifer Kim, a receptionist who spoke 5 languages fluently and was developing new client relationship protocols for Asian partnerships. "Dr. Wei," Jennifer Kim said as she entered Lin's office for their weekly mentoring session, "I wanted to thank you for creating opportunities for people like us. 6 months ago, I was answering phones and scheduling meetings. Today, I'm helping negotiate multi-million-dollar partnerships in 3 different countries." "Jennifer, the opportunities were always there," Lin replied. "What we created was a system for recognizing and developing them. Your language skills and cultural knowledge were valuable assets from the day you started working here. It just took time for the organization to realize it." The transformation of Chen Holdings had exceeded everyone's expectations. Under Lin's guidance, the company had become one of the most successful American firms operating in Asian markets, with a reputation for cultural sensitivity and collaborative business practices that attracted both clients and partners from around the world. But the changes extended far beyond financial success. Chen Holdings had become a case study in organizational transformation, featured in business schools and management journals as an example of how companies could unlock hidden value by changing their assumptions about talent and expertise. The story of Lin's journey from janitor to executive had been covered by major business publications, but Lin was careful to emphasize that her individual success was less important than the broader lessons about recognizing and developing human potential. "My story is remarkable only because it highlights how many other stories like mine are never discovered," Lin had told a reporter from the Harvard Business Review. "Every organization has employees whose knowledge and experience could benefit the company if leadership were humble enough to seek it out." The interview had led to speaking invitations from universities and business organizations around the world, all wanting to understand how Chen Holdings had systematically transformed their approach to talent development and cultural competency. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition had come from an unexpected source. 3 months earlier, Lin had received a letter from Tsinghua University, her former employer in Beijing. inviting her to return as a visiting professor to teach a new course on international business collaboration. Dr. Wei, the letter had read, your innovative work in bridging Chinese and American business cultures has brought honor to our university and advanced the field of international economics in ways that purely academic research cannot achieve. We would be honored to have you share your practical insights with our current students. Lin had accepted the invitation, but with a condition that reflected her commitment to recognizing expertise regardless of its source. She would teach the course only if Chen Holdings Cultural Intelligence Fellows could participate as guest lecturers, sharing their own experiences of bridging different cultural and professional worlds. The arrangement had created a unique educational experience where students learned not only from an established academic, but from professionals who had lived the challenges of cultural adaptation and had developed practical solutions based on real-world experience. Dr. Wei, David Chen said as he entered her office for their monthly strategic planning meeting, I wanted to discuss the proposal from Beijing University about establishing a joint research center for cross-cultural business studies. The proposal was ambitious, a collaboration between Chen Holdings, Beijing University, and several other institutions to create a research center that would study and teach best practices for international business collaboration. Lin would serve as the center's director, bringing together academic research and practical business experience to develop new approaches to cross-cultural partnership. David, I'm interested in the proposal, but I want to make sure the research center maintains our commitment to recognizing diverse sources of expertise, Lin replied. Academic credentials are valuable, but so is practical experience and cultural knowledge gained through living and working in different environments. That's exactly why we want you to lead it, David said. Your unique perspective, combining academic expertise with practical business experience and personal understanding of cultural transition, is precisely what this field needs. As they discussed the details of the research center proposal, Lin reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since that evening when she had finally decided to speak up in the conference room. She had gone from being invisible to being internationally recognized, from having her expertise dismissed to having it sought after by universities and corporations around the world. But the most important change wasn't in her external circumstances. It was in the recognition that expertise and intelligence came in many forms, and that the most valuable contributions often came from people who had been overlooked by traditional systems of evaluation and recognition. Standing at her office window, looking out at San Francisco Bay where cargo ships from around the world brought goods and people from dozens of different cultures, Lin thought about all the hidden stories of expertise and knowledge that existed in every city, every company and every community. Her own story had been remarkable, not because she was uniquely talented, but because she had been given the opportunity to demonstrate talents that had always existed. How many other stories remained hidden because of assumptions, prejudices, or simple failure to recognize that intelligence and expertise could be found anywhere? The cleaning lady, who had been dismissed as irrelevant, had become the executive who transformed a company's entire approach to international business. But more importantly, she had proven that every person deserved to be seen, respected, and valued for their knowledge and potential, regardless of their current circumstances. And in a world that was becoming increasingly interconnected and culturally diverse, that lesson was more valuable than any single business success or professional achievement. Dr. Lin Wei had not just found recognition for her own expertise, she had created a model for how organizations could discover and develop the hidden talents that existed all around them, waiting to be recognized by leaders humble enough to look beyond their assumptions and wise enough to value human potential wherever they found it. What an incredible journey we've witnessed together. From that moment when Dr. Lin Wei was dismissed and mocked in Mandarin, thinking no one would understand, to watching her transform not just a failing business deal, but an entire company's approach to recognizing human potential. This story proves that intelligence, expertise, and dignity exist in every person, regardless of their job title or circumstances. Lin's transformation from overlooked janitor to internationally recognized executive shows us that our assumptions about people can be not only wrong, but incredibly costly. Her story reminds us that the person cleaning your office, serving your coffee, or answering your phones might possess knowledge and experience that could change your entire perspective, if only you're humble enough to recognize it. If this story inspired you as much as it inspired me, please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more incredible stories of hidden talent and unexpected triumph. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that every person deserves respect and recognition for their unique knowledge and contributions. And remember, the next time you interact with someone whose job title might tempt you to make assumptions, take a moment to see the person behind the position. You might discover expertise, wisdom, and insights that could change everything.